Can I just say one thing firstly? I love the name Eat Sleep Boxing Repeat.
Welcome back to ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted as always to be joined by Danny and Elliot. This is the big fight breakdown as two of the fighters who are two of the best fighters of the last generation face each other in Canelo Alvarez and Terence Crawford in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Elliot, Danny, good to be joined by both of you. It's a fight that is one of the biggest fights of this year. It's as I've said, two of the greatest fighters in the last few years. And there's a lot to unpack here, so we're going to get straight into it. Thank you as always for joining me. Daniel, I'll go to you first. Canelo here, he's been at undisputed super middleweight champion. He's been at that weight for a little while now. We know he's kind of moved up to light heavyweight during that time. He's kind of been really dominant in that weight division for a while now, and has had a fantastic career outside of that weight division as well, of course. If he was to lose to Terence Crawford, someone who's coming up two weight divisions, the smaller guy, how much does it ruin how much of a dent would that put in Canelo's legacy, in your opinion?
Significant, I think, for a few reasons. I think Canelo, whilst he hasn't suffered a defeat over the past couple of years, I do think his stock's taken a bit of a dent. That's partly due to in-ring performances and the sort of perceived reluctance to fight the fights the fans want to see. I mean, I think if he was to lose to Terence Crawford, who I know Canelo started his career at a lower weight, Crawford started at lightweight. We imagine Canelo will be the significantly heavier man in there. And because Canelo already has his detractors, he's someone who sort of splits opinion. I think those who do have a slightly negative opinion of him or certainly critical of some of his decisions will be quick to jump on this. And, for good reason. He's someone with the physical advantages. He's been a super middleweight for a very long time now. Crawford's only had one fight even at 154. So I think, yeah, when you factor in some of the outside of the ring variables as well, I think if Canelo was to say go out and a loss to Terence Crawford, the biggest fight arguably of his career, certainly up there, I think it would put a pretty big dent in his legacy.
Yes, it's massive, isn't it? So some people might say when the levels are as high as they are, does size come into it as much? And at the same time, we'll go on to it a little bit later in the video, is how faded are both fighters. Some people might say if Canelo is way past his best and he loses Terence Crawford, it wouldn't be as bad as if this was a prime peak Canelo and he was losing to Terence Crawford. But it's all up for debate. Elliot, what's your view on the situation? If kind of fight happens and Crawford kind of outpoints Canelo or even stops him, how much of a dent does that put into kind of his career, considering how much of a legend Canelo is in the sport?
Yeah, I agree with Danny. So I think he puts a fairly significant dent. I'll try and touch on some different things. And Danny's obviously spot on what he says there about, them obviously moving through the weights, and Crawford's a relative inexperience, well, obviously inexperienced at this weight, but even sort of the weight below. But I think you look at kind of Canelo, Crawford to me, I mean, we're obviously in boxing circles, so Crawford's obviously a massive name, but you kind of look a bit outside of that, and Crawford doesn't necessarily have the pull of Canelo either. So I think for people, even though like casual audiences, you look at that and go, bloody hell, what's happening here? Guys come up like several weight classes and beating Canelo, so put a bit of a dent in him with the sort of casual crowd. But I think Canelo's already also transitioned into the kind of Mayweather critique, I think, like Danny alluded to it there, not fighting the fights that you necessarily want to see him fight, Benavidez being a clear one. Also what happened around the kind of Triple G trilogy, first couple of fights, and obviously being close, but I think that dented kind of his legacy as well, to be honest, with what kind of happened in the first fight there. So I think this would almost be a kind of ongoing nail in the sort of coffin for people that aren't necessarily fans of him. But I think the fact that he'd be moving up to like two weight classes is almost like, it's almost like being in the school playground when you can't afford to lose people that are that much smaller in life than you. I think it would put a dent in him, to be honest with you. Even though I think he is on the slide, it would put a dent in his legacy 100% in boxing and outside of boxing as well.
Fantastic. Gonna go a bit off script to Elliot. Do you have Canelo down as an all-time great? Because I feel like people get quite protective in boxing, and some people defend Canelo until the end because of what he's done. But some people might bring up what you brought up. He's kind of had some of those wins on his record are debatable. The Golovkin fights. Remember when he fought Erislandy Lara a long time ago? That win was up for debate as well. But do you have him as an all-time great? The sport, someone who in 20, 30 years ago will still be talking about.
I think he deserves that to a degree. I do. I think in the different phases of his career, I think if you look at obviously not this latest phase where it does seem to be a lot of sort of cherry picking and kind of lesser opponents, but when he was kind of coming up, I think, the sort of Mayweather time, but beyond that time, sort of challenges actually you could look at and go, he didn't necessarily even have to face those guys. I'm looking at like people like Lara and other people like those like that. You think he actually took on quite difficult fights, and a succession of difficult fights. Obviously, there's also, I suppose you look at it and go, the Rocky Fielding one again doesn't look that great. The Amir Khan one to a degree doesn't actually look that great, even though Khan was a big name. But I think you kind of have to respect that kind of central run that he went on. To be honest with you, when he unified super middle as well, I think you've got to look at that and give him the sort of respect that would deserve almost kind of all time. But I do think you kind of see even people now when they're talking about, the current fighters, you don't actually often hear Canelo now popping up. It is very much kind of Crawford, Inoue, Usyk. Canelo's not even in that conversation. So I kind of think whilst he may deserve to kind of be around it, I don't actually think he will be in it. When you talk about next 30 years, we'll be talking about Canelo, maybe from a kind of events and like perspective and like the unifications that he has. But I don't think he'll hold the same kind of respect that obviously like Usyk will or Inoue will, or for that matter, probably Crawford, but especially if Crawford wins this.
Yeah, I think Canelo's maybe a victim of his own success in some ways because he's been a pro for such a long time. He's kind of had two careers in terms of the amount of fights he's had is a lot of the time double the amount of fights a normal pro would have. And kind of what was 15, 16 when he turned pro. And I just think he beat some pretty good names early on in his career, kind of albeit past it, Shane Mosley, Austin Trout, good fighters as well. And he was very young when he faced those guys as well. But because it was so long ago, I feel like these fights have maybe been forgotten about, and people think about moving up and facing Bivol and not having a lot of success in that fight. Dodgy wins over Golovkin, but it's all up for debate. Danny, is this Terence Crawford's last fight for you? Win or lose or draw? Could it be his last fight? We're in kind of an era of boxing now where we see a lot of rematches, which some people are for, some people are against. Obviously, we're seeing a big rematch in this country, aren't we, between Eubank and Ben later this year. But give us your thoughts. Win, lose, or draw? Is this the last time we'll see him in a ring?
The only reason I would maybe say it might not be is because of what you touch on there and the potential existence of a rematch clause. I think Crawford, you get the impression, has less desire to carry on than Canelo. Canelo's been earmarked for potentially 3 fights after this against 3 different opponents if he is to come through, where Crawford, even though he's got less mileage on the clock in terms of in the ring, he's older than Canelo. I think he must be, 37 now. He's talked about securing the bag, what that he'd be able to do for his community. Does a lot in Omaha, and I think just you get the impression that once he has that payday, I think even if he was to beat Canelo, I don't think he would get a fight of this size following it. I don't think, and I can't see him, staying at super middleweight defending against like a Hamza Shiraz, a Eubank Jr. fight. Don't get the impression he's going to move back down. So I think if it's not a rematch with Canelo following this, I think it will be the end for Crawford.
Yeah, look, I think it'll be nearly 38 by the time this fight happens. And look, I could be wrong here, but in terms of kind of super fights, I'm not sure what there is for him at 154 or 160. And I just think at 168, as you mentioned, does Terence Crawford want to fight Hamza Shiraz? I'm not sure. Chris Eubank Jr., I mean, I wouldn't completely write that one off if he wanted kind of a farewell, easy touch as a final fight, but we'll see. Elliot, what are your thoughts? Is this it for Crawford? Could you see him kind of going on, whether it's a rematch against a Canelo, trying to maybe defend all those belts at super middleweight, which are on the line? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I disagree with Danny, but my argument's not based on actually any of the sort of sound rationale that Danny's is. It's more just a case of I think this, but I'm going to go into it anyway. I think the only reason I think it is just to do with, I mean, especially if he wins here, say he kind of wins here, you look at it and go, you're undefeated. Turkey, is around putting on these massive contests. You could have obviously a significant amount of money in any of those other fights. Do you stop now? Almost like Usyk, where you go, right, I've beaten like kind of everyone I need to kind of beat, but I can still beat other names out there and I can still get paid a lot of money to do so potentially. So why would I not just continue even if I can maybe beat some of these people at 80% of my focus and edge? Maybe I just think he stays around for a couple more, to be honest with you, if the money's there. But yeah, I mean, Danny makes a very sound point around obviously him being older and just and obviously sort of articulating less desire than some of the guys that have gone to sort of 40 plus. But I still think the lure of massive amount of money on a sort of Riddier card will be enough to keep him around, maybe even for a couple more after this, especially if he wins, if he hasn't taken any losses either.
Yeah, I think that there's the influence of Turki Al Sheikh as well here. And I just think if he says, I want Terence Crawford to face Hamza Shiraz now, Terence Crawford might either have two options to face Hamza Shiraz or retire. Obviously, Hamza Shiraz, ambassador for Riyadh season. So I just feel that's maybe the influence that Turki Al Sheikh has on the sport nowadays. So we'll see. I think if Crawford wins, I think there's a good chance we could see a rematch as well, but we shall see. Elliot, we'll stick with you. How phased is Canelo Alvarez now? He's had nearly 70 fights. He's been around a long time. Is he a little bit past his best? Is he just shot to pieces? What's your view on where he's at?
It's hard to say shot to pieces, but he's definitely past his best. I think, you saw that last time out, that performance against William Skull was pretty poor from a sort of difference in abilities. And just the ability to almost kind of like close the ring off and stuff in that fight as well, like you sort of was being before, is just not really there. So I think quite significantly diminished, which I think is also the reason behind this, as Danny alluded to earlier, this kind of refusal to face some of the sort of live and bigger guys around the sort of super middleweight / cruiserweight division. So I think it's kind of an acknowledgement with him and also almost within boxing as well. So I do think he's shot. But then if you look at, like, obviously got that victory over Berlanga as well. It's not a bad win. Some of the names on his record, like Munguia, obviously, people say, well, what about Munguia? But the run he's even coming into this with, like, granted, he's like beating these guys, but not, not it's all points victories. So, like, I think in a way it's kind of the sort of, the sort of know-how and the boxing now is kind of still there while the body is kind of diminishing. So I do think, yeah, he's definitely a faded force. I don't want to go into predictions, but I think, I think like that 3-fight deal you look at that Danny was talking about, the 3-fight deal after this, it's going to have to be so carefully choreographed and sort of curated who he fights there, because, you've got to be so careful, because I can see like one of the preeminent names around those divisions actually beating him fairly convincingly at this stage. So, yeah, so I do think he's faded from what he was. But like you say, he's almost had 2 careers, and not to disrespect him, but I think that's a long career he's had, starting at whatever it was, 15 or something. Long time. So I think it's just natural for your body with that sort of wear and tear and that mileage to go this way.
Yeah, and I think one thing I would say about Canelo the last couple of years is he's beaten what there is to beat at super middleweight. The David Benavidez fight is never going to happen, which I think is disappointing for a lot of people, but beaten Edgar Berlanga, Jaime Munguia, Jamel Charlo, John Ryder with relative ease. However, it's not his fault that the competition's not really been there at super middleweight. And I just think what he's maybe needed in one of those fights is someone who can actually match him and someone who can actually test him and ask a couple of questions. And I don't think he's really had that in those fights. Whereas he maybe looked at David Benavidez fight and thought, that's too much for test. I could quite possibly lose that fight. So, yeah, it's been a bit disappointing last couple of years in his career. Danny, what are your thoughts? Elliot says significantly diminished. Would you agree with that? Would you disagree? Where's your head at?
Yeah, I would say significantly diminished from his peak. I think agree with Elliot. Calling him shot to pieces is a step too far. We've not seen that. He still has as strong a chin as ever. Always had one of the best chins in boxing. But for me, those extra gears that we saw against Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, Sergey Kovalev aren't there. I think a prime Canelo gets Jaime Munguia out of there, stops Edgar Berlanga, stops John Ryder, and he hurt those fighters, dropped some of them at various stages, but never came too close to stopping them. If you're going off the William Skull performance, he's a shadow of himself, although I'm maybe willing to give him the allowance that he perhaps boxed within himself to, prevent injuries, with knowing that the Terence Crawford fight was sitting and waiting. But yeah, I think even the most ardent of Canelo supporters would surely admit that he's not the fighter he once was.
Yeah, I think that the William Skull fight was all very strange. Was it 6 a.m. Riyadh time the first bell went for that? I mean, it was all just bizarre, a very bizarre experience for those that could stay up for that. I think it was not a great performance from Canelo, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens on September the 13th. Daniel, I'll stick with you as we kind of start to close here. Who's the bigger legend for you here? I know it's a tough question, and maybe it's an easier question to ask when both fighters have retired, but Crawford's the one who's stayed undefeated. Canelo's the one who maybe has the bigger names on his record. They've both won a lot of world titles in different weight divisions. who, as things stand, who's likely to kind of go down as the bigger legends, the one that kind of the one that casual fans are going to kind of think of more? Who springs to mind for you?
Oh, it'll be Canelo when you phrase it like that. He's had the much bigger nights. He's a much bigger star than Crawford, I think, will ever be, even if he was to beat him. He's sold out stadiums in Mexico and in America. He fought Mayweather, the Golovkin trilogy, the host of other names undisputed. Whereas Crawford, I guess through, you could say, no fault of his own, or maybe could have done better to promote himself, has only really had the Errol Spence fight to rival it. I think Crawford will be remembered amongst boxing hardcore fans and purists as the better fighter, but in terms of being an icon, I think they're both icons in the sport. But Canelo sort of transcended that, certain amongst Mexicans and Latin Americans. So for me, the way you phrased the question, sorry, I think you've got to say Canelo.
Yeah, Elliot, I'll phrase it quite slightly different for you. Is if there was someone's like back catalogue that you could watch or listen to, who would it be? Who would you who would you who would you think of more when it comes to sitting down and kind of watching old boxing fights from 10, 15 years ago? Who would you rather do that with? Like in terms of who's had the more entertaining career, who do you kind of admire more as a boxer? Who's up there for you?
When BBC Sounds put both of those catalogs on, to listen to, I'll be listening to both of them. Don't you worry about that. But I think it's tough because I kind of separate out the two careers of Canelo Alvarez. I think, like Danny said, that you have to say that Canelo Alvarez will go down as the bigger legend. But I think that's just the names he's fought, the champions he's fought, and I look at obviously the Mayweather loss was what it was, but like those names like Cotto, he obviously Lara, Trout, other those sort of names like that he's fought, like obviously champions that are well renowned. I think for me, Crawford's here. He fought Crawford, arguably for me, kind of that run of Ndongo, Postol, Gamboa, those sort of guys he was fighting was actually really challenging. I think the guys that he got later on, seemingly like the Kell Brooks, obviously the Khans, even the Spence, to be honest with you, were kind of beyond their peak. Like Spence obviously had those problems with the car accident and whatever, so like that kind of took away from that fight for me. So in a way, I would probably say if I was a boxing purist and I was looking at it, I'd probably arguably say I prefer Crawford probably out of the two, to be honest with you. But I can't sit here and say that he's going to go down as a bigger legend than Canelo because I don't think he will. Because if you look at Canelo, like the events that Canelo's been involved in, the age he was fighting some of these guys at, and the longevity of his career, I think you almost kind of have to say Canelo will go down as the bigger legend, irrespective. So yeah, if I've got a limited Wi-Fi signal in 1 hour to listen to it on BBC Sounds, I'll probably be listening to Canelo Alvarez take on any of those sort of big names, to be honest. And also, they think about actually the wraparound stuff they did with Canelo, they would do like with Mayweather, those sort of like those shows, like what was it called, like the Access All Areas or whatever, the HBO stuff they did with these sort of names and almost like household names. So like you look at it, casual audiences especially, like it's almost Canelo without a shadow of a doubt, just because he had that crossover kind of appeal inside and outside of boxing.
Yeah, all very fair points, chaps, and I can't help but think that Terence Crawford is a fantastic fighter, and he's got the undefeated record to match, but he's maybe not had the career he could have done if been promoted differently or had been in a different era, basically an era where there were more competitive fights for him out there. All right, chaps, we're going to do predictions. We'll go in alphabetical order. So I think, Danny, that makes you for, I don't know why we're doing in alphabetical order, but we are. Danny, we're recording this, about a month before the fight? What's your prediction for Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford, please?
Yeah, first and foremost, not to sort of piss on the bonfire, I don't think it's going to be a very entertaining fight. And as I sit here now, not with a huge degree of confidence, I'm going to go Terence Crawford to edge the fight on points. I think he's a busier fighter than Canelo, certainly at this stage of his career. And I think the accuracy, sharpness of his punches, I don't envision him hurting Canelo, but enough to give Canelo plenty to think about. And I think he'll bank enough rounds through that. I think he maybe won't, I hope so anyway, won't be as negative as William Skull, but I think he's a good enough boxer that he won't need to be to cause Canelo similar issues. And yeah, there's so many variables. I mean, Crawford's been horrendously inactive for the last 5 years, which could play a toll at his age. But I think he's a special fighter. I think Canelo's more diminished than he is, although I think they both are past it. I'll go Crawford on points.
Crawford on points. Elliot Grigg is next alphabetically, so we'll go there. Elliot, give us your prediction: Crawford or Canelo?
Yeah, I've been accused previously of copying Danny, but this is not one of those times. Even though I am going to have the same prediction, I actually like Terence Crawford on points. I think for me the interesting thing about it is kind of what style the fight's going to go. Like you would think, obviously Canelo being naturally like bigger at that weight. Do I see him sort of sitting on the ropes and trying to almost counter punch like he's done in previous fights? I think that would almost be bizarre to see him do that against someone smaller. So I'm not actually sure of actually how the fight's going to go from that kind of style perspective. But I just think, like Danny said, I think Crawford's less finished, frankly, than Canelo. And looking through the opponents, Canelo hasn't stopped any of the world-class opponents for a while. So for me, if you're looking at that, I also think I don't need to stop Terence Crawford, but I just think Crawford's far fresher. And I think all judging being sort of fair and equal over there, I think I actually quite like him for a points decision as well.
Fantastic. Should have mentioned this before we start doing this. As things stand, Crawford is the outsider according to odds. I'm seeing odds of 8-5 for Crawford to win and 21-10 for Crawford to win on points. Having said that, I'm going to disagree with both of you, gents. I'm going for Canelo to win this fight, and I think he could. Yeah, I'm going to go for a late stoppage for Canelo. I think it's a strange one because they're a weight class in boxing for a reason, as we all say. But Canelo's not a very big super middleweight, so I'm not sure if that kind of takes away from that point. But he does have a lot of experience at super middleweight now. As Danny said, Terence Crawford, very inactive, is too inactive. And for that reason, I'm edging towards Canelo to win this fight. I think it is one step too far for Terence Crawford, although he is a very special fighter.
Do you see Crawford laying there like Amir Khan, or do you think it'll be a bit less brutal than that?
Okay, we've turned the tables and Elliot's asking the questions now. No, I don't. He's not going to get knocked out that badly. No, I think that my worry for Crawford is rounds 9-12. Where's he at then? Carrying that extra weight, having been inactive. What does that look like? What does that part of the fight look like?
Yeah.
We'll see.
No, I think the weight thing's very interesting. Like
Yeah.
you say, does he just come in looking like he's had, he's enjoyed himself at Denny's a little bit or something, like, rather than actually being in sort of decent shape,
Yeah.
or how does he actually look? I think that's fascinating. That's a very good point. How does he actually look on the fight night?
100%, and like the weigh in as well. Does Crawford even come in at 168? That interests me as well. But we'll see. I feel like we're ending this video with more questions than we had at the start of it. But yeah, that's our nature. Danny, Elliot, thank you both very much for joining me. I will speak to both of you very soon.
Cheers all.
Thank you, mate. Always, guys. Thanks for watching.